Coming up on Arirang News, South Korean President Moon Jae-in meets in New York with his American counterpart Donald Trump. The focus is North Korea, ways to move forward on denuclearization, and holding another summit with Kim Jong-un. Seoul and Washington sign a deal for South Korea to import more American liquefied natural gas. It's a deal worth almost $10 billion over the next 2 decades or more. And South Korea reports a 4th case of African swine fever, a pig disease that threatens pork supplies. No threat to humans, but the government is ramping up its quarantine measures. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. In his meeting Monday with U.S. President Donald Trump in New York, President Moon said he hopes for successful nuclear negotiations so that North Korea and the U.S. can hold a 3rd summit soon. He said a 3rd summit would be a major turning point in the Korean peace process. Our Shin Se-min reports from New York.
The top item on the agenda of the 9th meeting between Presidents Moon Jae-in and Donald Trump was, of course, the prospective working-level nuclear talks between Pyongyang and Washington. The South Korean leader saw President Trump as a major contributor to the Korean peace process. And he expressed anticipation that a 3rd big meeting between the leaders of North Korea and the U.S. would be a world-class breakthrough.
조만간 제3차 북미 정상회담을 준비하기 위한 북미 간의 실무 협상이 열리리라고 기대를 합니다. 제3차 북미 정상회담이 열린다면 아마도 한반도의 비핵화의 새로운 질서가 만들어지는 아주 세계사적인 대전환 업적이 될 것이라고 믿습니다.
And President Trump also on the same page as his South Korean counterpart, and he boasted of his personal relationship with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
And the relationships have been very good. So we'll see what happens. But we'd like to see if we can do something, and if we can, that'll be great. And if we can't, that's fine. We'll see what happens.
On the regime's launching of short-range projectiles, Trump said his North Korean counterpart is rather a man of his word. Speaking on these Seoul-Washington relations, Trump said how South Korea is one of the largest buyers of military equipment from the United States, to which the South Korean presidential office said such business deals will strengthen their bilateral ties even further. Some of the shortfalls from the summit, though, no specific mention of lifting sanctions for the regime or how the trilateral alliance of South Korea, U.S. and Japan fits in with the denuclearization process. Hoping to maintain the impetus for peace on the Korean Peninsula, the South Korean leader will now take his message of hope to the UN General Assembly podium. There, he will share his thoughts on how the major players in the denuclearization talks can bring about lasting peace in the region. Shin Se-min, Arirang News, New York.
Now, the Moon-Trump summit offered some of the biggest hints yet that a 3rd North Korea-U.S. summit could be on the horizon. The leaders' remarks also appeared to show more flexibility on how they plan to negotiate with Pyongyang going forward. Our Park Hee-jun asked an expert what he sees in those comments.
A 3rd North Korea-U.S. summit coming soon. It's a distinct possibility considering how often the subject was broached during talks in New York between Presidents Moon and Trump. President Moon said a 3rd summit would be a historic turning point that creates a new denuclearization order on the Korean Peninsula. President Trump, while being cautious about fully committing to another face-to-face with Kim Jong-un, expressed hope for such a meeting at the same time, all while downplaying North Korea's recent series of short-range missile tests.
Well, we'll see. Right now, people would like to see that happen. I want to know what's going to be coming out of it. We can know a lot before the summit takes place.
President Moon's remarks on a new denuclearization order and President Trump's openness to another round of talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. This adds to what President Trump said last week about pursuing a new method on Pyongyang, which experts interpret as the U.S. softening its posture toward the regime.
After firing the hardliner former national security advisor John Bolton, Trump has stated that he's willing to restart the talks in a more friendly manner with North Korea. I think that's what the President Moon is referring to right now. So I think it's more about, not so much about the fundamental change in approach towards denuclearization is more about commending President Trump for having rediscovered willingness to negotiate with North Korea in a manner that's more amenable to North Korea.
And a similar pattern is emerging to the arrangements that preceded the two previous Kim-Trump summits, raising the possibility of the third summit.
Something similar is happening right now. Probably North Korea and the United States have been in touch, obviously. And given that President Trump is talking about it, it's likely that there will be a third summit soon.
And Kim and Trump are expected to continue their top-down approach to negotiations. President Trump has repeatedly been citing his very good personal relationship with the North Korean leader and the regime's suspension of nuclear testing. With all this and the positive signals sent by Moon and Trump on Monday, there are high hopes summit number 3 will happen, maybe even before the end of the year. Park Ki-jun, Arirang News.
South Korea's intelligence agency says working-level talks on denuclearization between North Korea and the U.S. could resume in the next 2 or 3 weeks. After a closed-door meeting in Parliament on Tuesday, rival lawmakers quoted National Intelligence Service Chief Seo Hoon as saying that depending on the outcome of those talks, a summit could also be held within this year. The intel chief also said that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un might make a 5th visit to Beijing, given that he met with Chinese President Xi Jinping before both of his summits with President Trump. As for Kim Jong-un possibly coming to South Korea, Seo did not rule out the possibility of him participating in the Korea-ASEAN special summit scheduled for November in the southern port city of Busan, should the denuclearization negotiations go well. South Korea and the U.S. have begun 2 days of negotiations in Seoul on sharing the costs of South Korea's defense. The South Korean delegation is headed by the lead negotiator from the last round of talks, Chang Won-sam, that is, until his successor is named. The U.S. side is represented by a State Department official, James DeHart. Washington has reportedly asked Seoul to pay $5 billion a year, a huge jump from the roughly $900 million Seoul pays now. The existing cost-sharing deal expires at the end of the year. The State Department spokesperson told South Korea's Yonhap news agency Monday that President Trump has made it clear that American allies can and should contribute more, considering the huge cost of maintaining U.S. assets and deployments. Now, at the UN General Assembly chamber, leaders from around the world, including President Moon Jae-in, met to discuss the climate crisis and ways to move towards a greener world. Yoon Jung-min reports.
UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres called on world leaders Monday for concrete and realistic plans to raise their contributions toward achieving net zero emissions by 2050. His remarks came at the UN Climate Action Summit 2019 in New York, where leaders from governments, business, and civic activist groups gathered to tackle the issue of climate change.
Nature is angry, and we fool ourselves if we think we can fool nature. Because nature always strikes back, and around the world, nature is striking back with fury.
Praising the 2015 Paris Agreement to combat global warming, Guterres called for no new coal plants to be built after 2020 and pressed for a phase-out of fossil fuel subsidies, aiming for carbon neutrality by 2050. U.S. President Donald Trump, who has scrapped regulations aimed at combating climate change and once called man-made climate change a Chinese hoax, stopped by with Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. There were no remarks from Trump, and he left after listening to remarks by German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. In a video message, Pope Francis called for the need to ramp up efforts to mitigate the impact of climate change and face what he described as one of the most serious and worrying phenomena of our time. Other leaders, including Merkel, promised to expand their country's contribution to combat climate change. Among them was South Korean President Moon Jae-in, who has made 3 pledges to combat the issue.
첫째, 한국형 지속가능 발전 목표 수립을 비롯하여 지속가능한 저탄소 경제로 조기에 전환하기 위해 다양한 방안을 모색해 나가겠습니다.
President Moon also called for efforts to clean up the atmosphere.
세계 푸른 하늘의 날 지정을 제안합니다. 대기질 개선을 위해서는 공동 연구와 기술적 지원을 포함한 초국경적인 국제 협력과 공동 대응이 반드시 필요합니다.
Other than those remarks, President Moon promised South Korea will expand its role to tackle climate change, such as doubling its contribution to the Green Climate Fund and hosting a P4G summit in South Korea. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Another case of African swine fever was confirmed today at a farm in Paju near the inter-Korean border. This is the fourth case so far. African swine fever is harmless to humans but fatal to pigs, so it's a risk to pork supplies across the country. As our Kim Jae-hee reports, the government is doing all it can to prevent it from spreading.
South Korea's Agriculture Ministry confirmed early Tuesday the fourth case of African swine fever in the country. This is the second case reported in Paju and comes only a day after the fever was found at a farm in Gimpo, south of the Hangang River, raising concerns over the spread of the fever. A new suspected case also reported on Tuesday at a farm in Gwangak County, Incheon. Inspections are currently underway and the results are expected to be out late Tuesday.
All suspected cases from pig farms in Gimpo and Paju were confirmed to be positive. Now is the time to recognize the urgency of the current situation, and all related authorities must be devoted to quarantine efforts.
The South Korean government is ramping up efforts to prevent any further spread, including slaughtering pigs within 3 kilometers of the farms affected. The Agriculture Ministry has also reissued the 48-hour standstill for pig farms, feed factories, and slaughterhouses as of 7:30 p.m. on Monday for Incheon and Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces. 4 months ago, North Korea revealed its own outbreak of African swine fever. The National Intelligence Service said on Tuesday that African swine fever has completely wiped out pigs in Gyeongbokgung Province in North Korea. Local authorities are currently inspecting waterways that connect to the north. Starting next month, South Korea's Rural Development Administration will work with Vietnam to discover the root of the spread as preliminary research to formulating a vaccine. Kim Jae-hee, Arirang News.
South Korea, the world's third biggest importer of liquefied natural gas, is going to buy more LNG from the United States starting in 2025. Korea's state-run gas company signed a deal Tuesday with BP. Kim Hae-sung reports.
South Korea will purchase $9.6 billion of U.S. liquefied natural gas over the course of 18 years starting 2025. According to the Trade Ministry on Tuesday, the state-run Korea Gas Corporation has signed an agreement with BP to buy 1.58 million tons of LNG from the U.S. The 15-year deal, which can be extended to 18 years at a seller's option, is the first long-term LNG purchase contract signed between Korea and the U.S. during the Trump administration. President Moon Jae-in also referred to the deal in his meeting with President Trump in New York.
이번 방문 기회에도 미국의 LNG 가스에 대한 한국의 수입을 추가하는 그런 결정이 이루어지고 또한 한국의 자동차업계와 미국의 자율주행 기업 간의 합작 투자가 이루어지게 되는데 이 모두가 한미 동맹을 더욱더 든든하게 발전시키는 것이라고 믿습니다.
Data by the Korea International Trade Association shows South Korea is the world's third largest LNG importer and mainly purchases LNG from Qatar and Australia. This latest deal is expected to help Korea diversify its sources of LNG. Bilateral energy trade between Korea and the U.S. has grown sevenfold since 2016, and Korea has been the #1 importer of U.S. LNG since 2018, surpassing Mexico and Japan. The Trade Ministry says U.S. LNG imports are expected to increase from 10.6% in 2018 to near 23% by 2025. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
South Korea's producer prices rose in August from the month before by a moderate amount, a sign of consumer inflation down the road. The Bank of Korea says the production price index came to 103.73, up 0.2% from a month earlier. The central bank said agricultural goods prices rose because of a decrease in supply. Prices of industrial goods, electricity, and gas edged up just a touch. On year, though, producer prices in August fell by 0.6%. The number of Japanese visitors to South Korea increased by more than 4.5% last month compared to a year ago. According to the Korea Tourism Organization on Monday, the figure for August came to almost 330,000. In contrast, the number of South Koreans going to Japan was down. According to the Japan National Tourism Organization, around 309,000 South Koreans went to Japan in August, down 50% on year. Many South Koreans are boycotting Japanese products and canceling plans to travel to Japan in protest against Tokyo's recent trade curbs on Seoul. It's time now for an in-depth look at the markets this afternoon. And for that, I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me today.
Well, the Kospi's up today for a 13th session in a row. We're right back up to the 2100 level. What's going on in the Korean markets and elsewhere?
Sure. Korean market seems to be doing quite resilient rise versus the other market seems to be fairly timid in terms of the price movement. If you remember last Friday, U.S. market fell quite a bit because of the reason that Chinese officials cutting their visit to U.S. short and maybe raising the doubts about the trade deal might not happen sometime in October. Right after the Chinese official left the U.S., Trump administration, Trump have said that they don't need to do the negotiation until the November of next year before the election. Clearly is showing that the possibility of the top negotiation schedule coming through, meaning that the possibility of economic recession could happen in the future that causes the other markets to fall. Especially yesterday, the European market did quite poorly because of a lot of the economic numbers coming through, particularly the PMI numbers are not showing good numbers. Clearly, signs of a slowdown is happening in Europe. So most of the people are concerned about the economic recession coming through for global economic market. But as for the Korea, it continues to do well based on very cheap valuation. Kospi was up about 0.45% today. As for Chinese market, it did poorly yesterday, but today it's slightly up somewhere between 0.2 to 0.5% somewhat.
Yeah, speaking of China, it wrapped up a new round of working level trade talks with the U.S. a few days ago. No major breakthrough as far as we know, but it looks like there's some optimism out there nonetheless.
Sure. Most of the people thought that the Chinese delegation was the one that canceled the visit to U.S. farms in Montana and various other states. But it seems that it's not China, but it is the U.S. have decided not to do this visit. The U.S. Treasury Secretary Mnuchin have said that it was their side that was postponing the visits. So clearly there was some confusion, and even Trump did not know that was the case. So that's why I think that Trump have said that the possibility of the tariff continues to happen until the end of the first election, until the election period in November next year. So the signs was that quite negative in terms of the talks, but now some of the signals are coming out that the negotiation will be made somewhat in October. Some soft level of negotiation can actually happen. Some kind of deal might be happening in October is putting some positive indications for most of the market. So European market it's doing okay. The Chinese market doing okay, and the U.S. futures are doing okay. So maybe there is a chance that some kind of small size of negotiation can happen in some time in October.
Indeed. Well, meanwhile, in the South Korea-U.S. summit today, we saw Korea agree to import more American LNG and a deal for companies from the two sides to work together on autonomous vehicles. Tell us more about that deal and what's been the market reaction.
Right. Clearly, the President Moon seems to be trying to show some good faith to U.S. And Korean president have said that it is reasonable fair share and you're talking about increase in defense budget and also talking about increase in U.S. weapon purchases. So clearly, Korea is willing to purchase more from U.S. Also, Moon reiterated that Korean government has signed an agreement to purchase U.S. LNG to diversify the LNG sources. Since the Korea, continues to buy, it does not generate any oils within the country, so continue to buy anything related to the oil from overseas. But it seems that they're expanding to U.S. And also, he has reiterated that a technology contract for automatic driving vehicles between U.S. and Korea has been signed. So clearly, Korean government seems to be trying to win some good faith from U.S. These news are definitely positive, and furthermore, the South Korea, North Korea issues, the nuclear weapon issues, all seems to be going in the right direction. So the summit lasted between U.S. and Korea lasted for more than 1 hour. Impact of this is definitely positive, meaning that Korea has suffered from a heavy risk premium attached to the equity market. But it seems that for the 14 days rise, clearly the risk premium for the country seems to be lowering due to the better relationship between the countries.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, thank you for sharing your insights with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Now, as we just alluded to, the U.S. and China will resume their high-level trade talks 2 weeks from now in Washington. This is according to Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin in an interview Monday with Fox News, in which he said the U.S. side will be led by Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and the Chinese side by Vice Premier Liu Ha. Mnuchin said he's hoping for a deal, but if the U.S. cannot get the right deal, it'll continue to use tariffs strategically. He also said the cancellation of a visit by Chinese officials to U.S. farms was requested by the U.S. to, quote, avoid any confusion around the trade negotiations. And he said the visit will take place soon. He made it clear the U.S. wants China to buy its farm goods, which China has reportedly agreed to do. The fall is a popular time to visit Seoul's royal palaces. It's not just the scenic backdrop of the mountains changing color. There's a special chance in the next couple of weeks to see firsthand what it would be like to attend a royal banquet back in the Joseon dynasty. Lee Min-sun has more.
The gates of Gyeongbokgung Palace are usually closed when night falls, but over the next 2 weeks, the palace grounds will stay open after sundown to provide visitors with a very unique and exclusive experience. As part of a special program, a handful of guests will be invited to attend a royal banquet at the palace's royal kitchen, along with live traditional music performances. The event will be held at Sojubang, where meals and sweets were prepared for kings during the Joseon dynasty.
Shishikgonggam offers a moving experience through performances and royal cuisine. Unlike other events at the palace that takes visitors on a simple tour, this program offers them a chance to sample unique dishes that were served only to kings while enjoying live performances.
The program is run twice a year during spring and fall. Starting this autumn, sessions reserved only to foreigners will be added, with information being provided in English.
I've been to the Gyeongbokgung Palace in the daytime and only saw the night view in a TV drama. The atmosphere in the palace is very special at night, and it's a unique experience to be able to eat here and watch the performances. I would recommend this to other foreign visitors.
I decided to come here to experience what it was like. The emperor was living in the past, so it's very good and it's very delicate, especially the one looks like a flower. I think the king truly has a good life in the past.
The food being enjoyed by visitors is identical to those that were served to kings and queens in the past. The meals consist of porridge, rice cakes, sweets, and tea. Some of them are garnished to create the shape of a flower and are beautifully arranged for extra visual appeal. This year's Shishikgonggam will run until October 5th and will be held every day except Tuesdays, offering 2 events per day at the Royal Kitchen of Gyeongbokgung Palace. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.
2019 has been a big year for international diplomacy in Korea, and there are profound exchanges happening between different nations every day. With a focus on cooperation and exchange, the show seeks to reinforce relationships between Korea and the world.